Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we return to the HS2 project, the infrastructure poster child for delay and cost overrun, as we discuss the content of a new book examining how this project went, as the title suggests, so badly off the rails. Few infrastructure projects in British history have generated as much debate and scrutiny as HS2, becoming a lightning rod for wider conversations about the UK's ability to deliver major infrastructure on time, on budget, and with public trust. And as we heard in episode 122 with James Stewart, for many the project was flawed from day one, with questions hanging heavy over its value for money, its environmental impact, and the opportunity costs of such a vast investment. Yet supporters hail it as a vital means to rebalance the UK's economy, boosting connectivity and capacity and securing the nation's greener transport future. Well, my guest today is journalist and author Sally Gimson, who has spent the last few years getting stuck into the history of the politics and personalities of the project. She's delivered it all up as Off the Rails, a compelling and informing read that gets under the skin of the project and attempts to make sense of the madness that has surrounded the project. From spiralling costs and shifting political priorities to the complex realities of one of the most ambitious transport schemes in Europe, Sally has explored why HS2 has faced challenges at every stage. And to be fair, few observers have had the time or the courage to dig into the full story, unpicking the web of decisions, ambitions and compromises that have shaped HS2's journey. Sally has done just that, revealing what the project says about the UK's infrastructure machine. And it's a story that blends ambition and caution, engineering brilliance and political miscalculation, and one that goes beyond the single railway line. In short, it's a fascinating and compelling read. So let's hear more. Sally, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Hello, thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Well, Sally, your book, and I've really enjoyed reading it, it had me hooked. It draws on extensive research and interviews and to capture the competing visions, technical and political challenges, and the lessons that must be learned if Britain is to deliver major projects more effectively in the future. So, the big question, having been on this journey, what went wrong?
Well, I do think it probably went wrong from the beginning. They wanted to build the fastest, best, most modern rail line in the world. That was what the ambitions of Lord Adonis was, and that's what Andrew McNaughton, the engineer in charge, that's what he was commissioned to do. So it started at the end of the Labour government in 2009, and Andrew McNaughton literally, I think, sat in a room in the Department for Transport and designed this super duper, all bells and whistles, most modern line that he could imagine, going from London to the West Midlands and then up to Manchester, and then another Y shape up to Yorkshire. And it was going to take time off the journeys. It would release capacity on the West Coast Main Line, and he was going to create the biggest, the best railway in the world. The problem with and Lord Adonis was absolutely 100% behind this. Gordon Brown, who was Prime Minister at that time, thought that it was going to be a great way to rebalance the economy after the financial crash. And it was, this was going to be Britain's sort of big project, showing that we were a modern nation. I think, I didn't realise this until I started writing, but I really think from the beginning it was doomed, because it wasn't part of any kind of wider transport strategy. It was too modern. It was too innovative. The Japanese have been building high-speed rail since 1964, when we were still building steam trains. And the Chinese, who started sort of about 20 years ago, have absolutely honed high-speed rail down to the sort of basics. And yet we were thinking that somehow we were going to build this bespoke system that was going to ignore all this other knowledge that had been out in the world for sort of 50 years and build our high-speed line. I mean, it was bonkers from the beginning, basically. Yeah,
which of course, I mentioned this recent review of the project by James Stewart, and he pointed out that projects don't go wrong; they start wrong. And that lesson, in your words, is build a rationale for your project that has national buy-in. So. I mean, clearly you agree with James that it was doomed from the start. Could it have been saved from the people you've talked to? Could it have been saved at key turning points? If we could start over, what should we have done differently?
Yeah, and I think it absolutely could have been saved, because this was this grand project that Lord Adonis had come at the end of the Labour government. And when the Tories came in, when the Conservatives won in a coalition government in 2010, there was absolutely an opportunity for them to relook at it. And they did relook at it. They had committed to a high-speed rail, but they hadn't committed necessarily to this specific project. So I think they had 2 years between 2010 and 2012 when they could have looked at it and said, hey, great idea. Let's make this part of a wider transport strategy. And for God's sake, let's not build this. Let's go to Spain and find out what they're doing. And let's build a modular railway. Let's take the best in the world that we know to make the simplest, cheapest high-speed rail. And there's loads of knowledge out there. Let's take all of that together and let's build a railway like that. And let's think about how it fits into the rest of the railway system. And even, which we've never done in the UK, and I found out, think about how the rail system works with the roads and the planes and everything else.
You're talking about integrated transport there, Sally. I mean, that's kind
I'm talking about integrated transport. And apparently we just don't do integrated transport.
Well, to write this book, I mean, as I say, you've spoken to politicians, civil servants, engineers, scores of people up and down the line. You describe it, as a story of, amongst other things, how top-down projects are no longer possible in the age of online warriors and populism, amongst other things. I mean, it's a great read. It leaves us with 22 lessons learned, which, I'm sure that the infrastructure community will give a good look at. I'm sure they'll have a view on each of them. But why did you, a political journalist, why did you want to write this book?
So there were several reasons. First of all, I'm originally from Scotland, so I want to get to go and see my mum, my aged mum in Edinburgh, a lot quicker. And at the moment it takes 4.5 hours to get there, and so I'm interested in how to join the country up better. And in the 1980s, when the intercity trains came in, suddenly Scotland was not 8 hours away on a very slow train. It was more like 5.5 hours, but it was much closer to England and to the rest of the country. So I have a kind of interest in thinking about how to join the country up, and I hate it when I take a domestic flight. So that's the first thing.
Right.
The second thing is that I was a councillor in Camden. So of course HS2, from the time that I became a councillor in 2011, HS2 was on the agenda the whole time.
Yeah.
And they were knocking down flats in Camden. It almost became such a boring discussion. It was there were lots of people whose lives were being affected, which is really serious. But the actual discussion about whether it was a good thing to get quicker to Birmingham or not was sort of never resolved. And I didn't know what I thought about it. I didn't know whether I thought it was a good idea or a bad idea. And so I wanted to find, actually, I was interested in finding out. I'm not sure whether writing a book is necessarily the way to find out. And also I'm interested in politics. So I was interested in the whole politics of the line, and I had this feeling and the politics of building infrastructure. And I do have a sort of slightly geeky interest in infrastructure, but from a political point of view.
It was a self-help project, basically, is what you're saying.
It was a self-help project. And I also suspected that the politics of HS2 mirrored the politics of what was going on in the wider sort of political sphere over that sort of 15 years. So it was a way of writing about that as well. It was a way of using HS2 to write about the politics of the time.
Yeah. Well, what do you say in the book is, what should have been a source of national pride is now a multi-billion-pound bleeding stump of a line, a rebuke to the inability of successive reckless Conservative governments to decide what kind of country Britain should be. So, I mean, who bears the responsibility for the chaos? I mean, politicians, is it civil servants, is it engineers, or is it someone else?
Oh, well, that was the thing, that nobody's taken responsibility for this. That's the interesting thing. Nobody's taken responsibility for this. There was a sort of lack of leadership through a whole thing. People tried to take leadership. I think Andrew Stevenson, who's the minister for HS2, although a relatively junior minister, did take leadership of it for the very short period that he did it between about 2020 and 2022. But basically, in some ways it was one of those things where it was like a sort of Agatha Christie novel, one of those Agatha Christie novels, like like Murder on the Orient Express, but one of those novels where basically everybody is responsible. Everybody to some extent was responsible. But I think that going back to that sort of 2010 to 2012, I think it was an opportunity then to build something different, to sort of reimagine it, and to reimagine it as part of a transport strategy. So in a sense, there's a fault there that didn't happen. And 2012, Justine Greening could have said, we've rethought this and we're going to do something completely different.
Yeah. But of course, when Prime Minister Gordon Brown got behind the project in 2009. It was about spreading economic growth across the UK. And you could say, well, it was really a kind of a desperate political move maybe to try to have something to go into the election with, which was good for the country. I mean, you say if you take London out of the equation, the UK has got the economy of Mississippi. The reality is that the UK is unusual in that it's got so much economic wealth driven around one capital city. So the project was really about joining up Britain through a modern public transport system. A rare example, you say, in politics of what you describe as cathedral thinking. What is cathedral thinking then?
Well, I suppose it's about thinking that you can build something really big that will have a major effect on the country, and that will start to define the country differently. That was the impetus behind it, and I'm absolutely
it's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Which is a good thing, and I absolutely, in a way, I really agree. I mean, Lord Jones had this thing that going around make, do, and mending, which is actually what I'm seeing the current government doing with the transport system is not necessarily a viable future. It probably is about building new infrastructure. We've got our infrastructure at the moment comes from the Victorian times. We can't run double-decker trains because the tunnels aren't built to do that, and the bridges are too low. There's lots and lots of things we can't do on the railway system because we're still running because it's still Victorian, and that someone pointed out to me that's not going to last for another 100 years, is it? So if we're still going to have trains and we're still going to run railway lines, we can't just keep repairing them. So I absolutely think we do need new infrastructure, but we need to work out how to do it and to work out how to do it cheaply.
Because you are fairly critical of the project delivery. I mean, you say nothing on this scale had been tried before in modern Britain, and the men, mostly men it was, in charge of commissioning... in charge of commissioning and managing the project were hopelessly out of their depth. I mean, your lesson you come out of this is know your limitations. Many at senior level in the civil service, you say, HS2 and the government, with honourable exceptions, maybe you can say who, were out of their depth. And you clarify it was politicians and parts of the civil service who were most to blame, and Treasury, which continually tried to slash costs without any understanding of modern civil engineering. So for you, I mean, are the engineers, the project professionals, the contractors really the victims of this project?
Well, I think some of them made an awful lot of money, so... So it was kind of keeping a lot of big construction firms in the money for quite a long time. I mean, I know Leo Quinn has been very, publicly very critical about this.
That's the chief executive of Balfour Beatty, yeah.
Yeah, he's been very publicly critical of it because they were being asked to build this, and then politicians were changing their minds all the time, and then complaining about costs, and then wanting to add more tunnels, and then complaining about costs. Well, they'd added more tunnels; it was going to cost more. So yeah. I mean, and I certainly think for lots of the contractors, this was kind of a toxic nightmare project that was under constant political scrutiny. So it was really it was difficult. But I also do think it was also gold plated. They knew that the people that were commissioning had no idea of what they were doing. So they were just it'll cost you. You really want this bespoke thing.
But you also say make sure you've got the expert engineering advice from people in countries who've actually built high speed rail. And I imagine that to be honest, there were quite a lot of those contractors involved, and the design companies who had international experience. So, I suppose, why do you think, A, it never happened, and B, what difference do you think it would have made?
I do think commissioning, and actually you had a podcast, didn't you, on commissioning only the other week. Commissioning's I think commissioning's really important. So I worked in local government. I was a local councillor. And what I realised is that big companies often de-skill the public sector so that the public sector can't commission properly because it doesn't really understand what's going on. And it's in the interests of companies to de-skill the public sector because then they can get away with whatever they want. They can absolutely up the price, and no one's going to ask too many questions. So I think we really do need to think very, really carefully about how we commission stuff, and having civil servants who understand engineering and understand how to commission that. And it's no good getting consultants in either because they're going between all the sides. It is about having those skills absolutely inbuilt into the civil service. And at the moment, what happens in the civil service is that the people who are promoted, who get to the top, are people who understand about policy. They're not people who understand about delivering on the ground.
Right, yeah.
And I was horrified that actually at the Department for Transport was a handful of civil servants. And I was interested in reading the regulator about Ofwat, which is who regulates water. And they were also, and that report into Ofwat recently said that Ofwat only had a handful of engineers. So there's nobody either regulating the industry or indeed in civil service commissioning it who is an engineer and who understands about these projects. And instead you have people, Oxbridge graduates who have done history degrees and think they can learn on the job. I've never heard of so many people talking about learn on the job. I think they can learn on the job to build any kind of infrastructure project. So I think if they were engineers and they did understand how the world worked, they would have said, look, let's do an extension of HS1, which was the TGV Nord technology, or let's go to Spain and see how they did it. Let's understand that actually if you want to get a high-speed train into a major city, do what the French do and bring it in on lines that already exist. Don't start trying to build high-speed lines into the centre of cities. And if you're not going to do that, do it on the outskirts and get a proper tram system or get a proper public transport system to bring it in. I mean, all of these weren't problems that were new. They were problems that have been thought about for 50 years.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about you, Sally. As you said you come from Scotland, based in London. Connections and infrastructure matter to you, as you pointed out. You began your career in journalism working for The Observer and Sunday Telegraph. You've written articles about people and politics for the New Statesman and Guardian. As a non-infrastructure professional, what baffled you most about the UK project delivery setup?
I think sometimes when you get close to government, you think that government is run by these really, these people who are different from you and who understand the world. And that's what they must be like. And then when you get close, you understand that they don't really, and possibly even understand it less than you do. And that's weird. And I thought that I suppose I hadn't realised, so I suppose I hadn't thought about it enough. I hadn't really realised that there's been no big infrastructure bill, apart from in London, bits in London, mostly transport systems in London and the Thames Highway Tunnel. But apart from...
Yeah, we've had Jubilee Line Extension, we've had Crossrail, Thames Tideway.
And they're all based in London and the South East. And we've had HS1, we've had the Channel. But apart from that, we haven't really built any infrastructure projects in the rest of the country. And we, as you say, we have this huge economic disparity from the rest of the country. And so we don't actually know how to do it. And that was extraordinary. I mean, when you think about HS2, that's the extraordinary thing. We don't actually know how to do it because we ain't done it except in London on sort of urban projects in London. And then we're trying to embark on the biggest, best, newest, we've never done it before.
Yeah, I know. But I suppose we have done it. We have done it around the world. There's many examples of UK infrastructure professionals being involved in some incredible projects all around the world.
Exactly. So our infrastructure professionals absolutely know how to do it. We have some of the best engineering schools in the world. Say Imperial and places like that. We have some of the best engineers in the world. We have some of the best infrastructure people in the world, but we don't know how. I think it is the commissioning. We don't have that knowledge or expertise within the British state to be able to get those experts. It's like having a Rolls Royce and not knowing how to drive it.
Yeah.
We don't know how to drive it. We've got basically these people who can do anything, and we don't actually know how to ask them to do it.
Well, clearly, Sally, you have enjoyed writing this book. You have a dedication for Eliza, Clive and Katie. Who are they? And why have you dedicated the book to them?
They're my kids. So they're my 3 kids. And they've been really supportive of me over the last few years. And they're grown up now. They're all grown up. The eldest is 29, the youngest is, and then 25 and 23. And they've been incredibly, and I really wanted, so this is the first book I've ever written. One of my ambitions was, I think when you're bringing up kids, it can be really difficult to write a book. It can be really difficult to find the time to do that, and to argue to yourself, particularly as a woman, for the space to do that. And they have really supported me in arguing for the space to research and write a book and do something serious. Yeah,
but of course it's a project which should really be about underpinning their futures.
Of course it is.
Yeah, bringing aboard local communities is a key point that you make. And between 2011 and 2018, you were a Labour councillor for Camden, as you said, and you reference Camden resident and now councillor in Camden, Nazreen Demai, who was evicted from her home aged 12 to make way for the project. I mean, what did that experience teach you about delivery of infrastructure?
Yes, I mean, for me, she felt suddenly that she felt a stranger in her country, that she didn't matter. that what mattered was the infrastructure because it was being done top down, and she and her life and her family's lives didn't matter because their block could be bought and then it could be flattened. And unless I think Camden Council had really fought, she might have ended up not living anywhere near, not living in London at all and living somewhere completely different.
Yeah.
And I think that taught me that if you're going to do infrastructure projects, people are really important. So the people who are going to be affected by this are really important. And what struck me the most about this actually was the people in London who didn't have very much and the people along the line who didn't very much, they didn't necessarily get as much money as it was worth for their houses. And people like Nazreen just found their whole neighbourhoods being flattened. And the rich people actually managed to get paid off and got loads of money. And the train line was sort of moved to go away from large National Trust houses. So the class system was sort of there within the project.
Well, you've referenced the Have I Got News for You opening credits where the cartoon shows the train screeching around the stately homes and ploughing through council estates in the middle of the country. I mean, being flexible is one of your lessons, and you were briefly parliamentary candidate in Bassetlaw in North Nottinghamshire, and you met communities who desperately needed the infrastructure investment in many ways. This disparity, was it about cost? Or did it reveal something deeper about their political priorities and voices who carry weight in major infrastructure decisions?
Yeah, I think that's what it revealed. It revealed whose voice counted here. And if you were rich and powerful and you had money, then you got paid off, and you were making a lot of fuss, then you most often got paid off because it was the simplest and easiest thing to do, especially if you were building a large infrastructure project like this. If you didn't have a voice, then you didn't matter because the project would just plough through where you lived. I think there was a big, and that sort of class disparity. It was fine if you were rich and you were middle class or upper class, then actually things were done for you. This train line, which is supposed to be completely straight, could be altered a bit, so it went away from your house. But if you had less money, that wasn't true. I also have a big thing that I think communities weren't brought on side. There was a very adversarial culture with HS2 as well. It was either we're going to force this through, or it was we're going to throw money at you. But there was no real investment in, is this a national project? Can we bring you guys on board? It was all about it was all, in a sense, either about being really horrible to people or about paying them off.
Well, something that caught my attention was you describe a female-led collaborative culture at Camden Council, which contrasted with the macho environment at HS2 and Network Rail, who you describe as obstructionist. I suppose you also talk about in one of your lessons in the need for collaboration, and the point you make is be nice, don't antagonise those that you want on side. I mean, was that an inevitable outcome of the political engineering pressures at the time, or was it just simply to do with this culture that was which was around the project?
I think it was the sort of top-down cut. I think this goes back to the beginning. We're going to build the fastest, best, biggest railway in the world. And it's a top-down thing. And you've either got to get with the programme, or go away. This is going to drag Britain into the 21st century. And if we're going to rebalance the economy, we need to do this. And you guys are just going to, you're going to have to get out of the way because this is the future.
Yeah. You talk about the national mission for railways, or the national this project being a national mission, and you talk a lot in the book about the UK's rich railway history and reference the opening of Stephenson's Manchester to Liverpool Railway, which was completed in 1830 in the kind of the heyday, the boom. It was above budget even in those days at £280,000, but it did truly capture, as you point out, the public imagination. There's a lovely story you got in there about MP William Huskisson, who was hit by the rocket after he got off the train to have a chat about politics, and you paint, which is it's a good read, tragic circumstances. Anyway, you paint a vivid contrast between the vision of HS2 and Britain's proud railway heritage under figures like George and Robert Stephenson. I mean, why do you think that the UK, once this global pioneer of railway engineering, has struggled so badly, as you say, to deliver so little in terms of new high-speed or any railway lines in the 21st century?
I think. Well, this was the age, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and these were all built through the private sector. So they were all built with it was the big cities of Manchester and Liverpool which provided the money to build these railways. The state really had very little involvement in them. They had to go through Parliament in terms of these private bills. So that they didn't go through. They didn't really upset a huge landowner. I mean, please, such
No.
So they didn't upset a huge landowner. So they did have to go through Parliament, and sometimes that could be tricky. But in the end, they were part of this huge industrial revolutionary boom, and they none of them were built by the state, and they competed with each other. So you would get several lines going to Carlisle, and when, for instance, and they raised all the money to do this through stocks and shares. And originally it had been just to move freight. It had been to move, all the goods between Manchester, between the port in Liverpool, and into the sort of cotton factories and everything in Manchester. But actually, from the very start, people liked traveling in trains, and so they used them, and then people were prepared to buy shares in train lines, and there was a huge boom in this.
But you point out it was chaotic, speculative, it was politically fraught. You draw parallels between the railway mania and the later financial bubbles, because it all fell apart. People lost a lot of money. Is there a danger that HS2, maybe at least in its early stages, suffered from that kind of overpromised and underestimating, dressed up in modern political language?
Yes, only I think so. What happened was the trains were being built early on. They were very successful. It was only sort of later on, when everybody sort of got into this and everyone was buying shares in railways, and everybody who was a sort of builder was trying to build railways, and these big railway magnates were sort of taking on building Ponzi schemes. They were borrowing. They
were Ponzi schemes, weren't they?
They were basically building Ponzi schemes to build more railways to get more money. And someone who was an MP, sort of it all went horribly wrong and everything collapsed. So I actually think it's really different. I think what we did then was part of a sort of industrial revolution and empire. So we were making a lot of money by selling all these trains into the empire as well. And so we were selling them all over the world. We're doing much more in the 19th century, I think. Much more what the Chinese are doing today. So we own the technology, we were building technology, and we were selling it to our empire, and we were making loads and loads of money out of it generally. The trouble now is that we've sort of got those grandiose ideas that we were the first people to do the railways, and so we should be able to do the newest, most modern technology. But in fact, we're much more probably like the French and the Germans who were learning from our technology and using our technology to build their railways in the 19th century, which is what we should have been doing. And we kind of had this idea we have to be the biggest and the best railway people, and therefore it has to be all be modern because that's who we are, instead of being humble and saying, actually, everybody in the world is doing this fantastically well. We need to take their technology.
Yeah. So, which brings us to the politics of HSC, because it in many ways it is the child of some really interesting politics. You highlight that leadership is vital, having a guiding mind on mega projects and clear lines of responsibility. And of course, when Lord Adonis, who was that kind of guiding mind, he stood up in the House of Lords in 2009 to announce HS2, he proclaimed it to be manifestly, and the phrase is manifestly in the public interest. Yet you highlight that HS2 was also born out of political expediency. I mentioned that Gordon Brown having to have something to hang on to. And you talk about cakeism, the idea that you can have everything without having to have any painful choices, that was baked in from the start. What do you mean by that, cakeism in relation to the way that Lord Adonis set the project up?
I suppose that you didn't have to make any choices about how much it cost. You didn't have to make any of those trade-offs. There's environmental trade-offs. You wanted basically to have your cake and eat it. You didn't want to sort of say how much it was really going to cost. It was like we were going to do this grand projet, and everyone had to get into line, and you could have your cake and eat it. Details.
You also highlight the Treasury was not happy about HS2 and was essentially
Treasury wasn't happy from the beginning.
No, pursuing a wrecking strategy, you say?
Yes, they were doing a wrecking strategy. Well, that was the other interesting thing about that, actually, that there were parts of government, and the Treasury was part of it, but there were also other parts of government who basically didn't really believe in HS2 and were trying to wreck it. So you were investing billions of taxpayers' money in this enormous infrastructure project. You were getting some, as you say, some of the best engineering firms in the world who serious people to build this, and yet government itself was sort of, no, I don't know whether we really want to do it, and let's, this is Department of Transport, let's try and sort of screw them over in some way. Well, number 10 in 2020 was divided about whether to do it or not.
Yeah. Well, you quote Margaret Hodge, former MP and chair of the Public Accounts Committee. I think she told you, and I quote, "We knew it was bollocks from day one." But she added, "It was a grand projet, and there are men who like grand projets." And she argued that the civil service lacked both the engineering expertise, as you point out, and that the implementation capacity to manage the project on the scale of HS2. I mean, the governance model was fundamentally flawed, wasn't it? I mean, Margaret Hodge puts it very well.
Yeah, no, I think she's right. The government didn't have the ability to do it, and there wasn't the ability within the civil service to do it. And bringing in, and they're not delivery people. You know, mostly in this country, when things are delivered, the civil service makes up the policy and decides how to do it. And then very often it's delivered by local government. It's not delivered centrally by the civil service. The civil service is not really not much of a delivery mechanism, particularly for big projects, and if they're going to be one, which if they're going to rebuild a lot of the infrastructure in the UK, they're going to have either a minister. So someone says, and all of this then sort of gets sucked into the Treasury. And there is an argument actually you should have a different sort of Ministry of Economic Affairs or something like that, which where you do build up that expertise, so you can build stuff, you can build infrastructure that's separate from the Treasury. And quite a few modern economies have this division between the person who oversees the money and decides what it is and the person who's actually going to do some of the building and delivery.
But I suppose also having a big beast of politics at the helm is also very good. I mean, Lord Heseltine really drove Jubilee Line extension. You have people like John Prescott who were really driving HS1. The reality is that government leadership of HS2 was something of a revolving door. But of course, when Patrick McLaughlin, arguably, something of a big beast himself, he came into as Transport Secretary in 2012. Again, it was without, as you say, much prior knowledge of HS2. And he was, as you say, learning on the job. But he quickly became one of those vocal champions. I mean, do you think his conviction and his ability to get the alignment of Cameron and Osborne, that really drove the project forward?
Yes, I do. I think 2012 was a decision point. They could have decided not to do it, or they could have decided to do it differently. And they decided that they were going to go ahead with this project. And really, as you say, Patrick McLaughlin took it up and said, OK, we're going to do this and we're going to drive it forward. And he did. But then, of course, you got Brexit. Everything was then up in the air, and Cameron and Osborne and everyone was swept away. And I think that's another changing moment. That's another moment when the momentum was lost. And I have great difficulty in knowing they laid the contracts, the first contracts to sort of prepare the land and everything in about 2017. But it was really hard to find out politically why. I'm not sure what went on between 2017 and 2020 in terms of driving the project. It just went into this kind of political lull. And and I kept saying to people, well, what happened? And they said, well, there wasn't the political bandwidth. Everyone was thinking about Brexit. And
meanwhile, of course, and you talk a lot about it in the book, there was a very, very strong opposition campaign. There was a very strong set of naysayers and very well organised, not necessarily that successful in terms of what they managed to achieve. But figures like Christian... I'm talking about of the organisations like HS2 Action Alliance, who ultimately lost their judicial review case, I believe. But figures like Christian Walmar and George Monbiot, they had enormous influence over public opinion on HS2. They turned the intellectual and political atmosphere, perhaps against HS2, as you say, particularly, as you say, the Guardian reading left. I think George Monbiot, you quote him saying, or describing the project as a baggage train of bullshit, which is a fairly kind of descriptive quote. Could earlier engagement with such naysayers like Walmar and Monbiot have prevented this deep polarisation?
Yeah, so I absolutely think that. I think that nobody. So I talked to Christian, and nobody tried to get Christian on side. So he is one of the most influential train commentators. But he said he had one meeting, I think, with a government minister. No one tried to get him on side. And even I think even in the north, which was where it was supposed to go, there was some support, but it didn't have this big swell of support there either, and there was very little that was done to get that support. And I think. And sorry, we're going back to the Victorians now, but I think one of the things that made the train successful, another thing that made the train successful in the Victorian times, was that the leaders of it, the people who were leading industries and running things in, and the businessmen and local government in Liverpool and Manchester really, really wanted the railway, and they were invested in it, and they were giving money to it, and they were building shares in it. Nothing like this happened with HS2. They were fighting with local government in Manchester. They were fighting with the mayor of Manchester about where the station was going to be overground and underground, right until the line was cut. That's craziness. They didn't have them on board.
And then, of course, the end was perhaps inevitable. Andrew Stevenson, he came in as HS2 Minister in 2020. You describe him stepping into one of Europe's largest infrastructure projects as another minister with minimal prior knowledge but strong political loyalty. But, of course, he faced incredible circumstances, COVID, inflation, paralysed government, interference from advisors like Andrew Gilligan, Boris Johnson's transport advisor and friend, who you describe as an unwelcome guest at the meetings, which I suppose in many ways sums up a lot of people's views about his input. Andrew Gilligan and Policy Exchange emerge as central players in the book as influencing Rishi Sunak's decision. Do you think that episode really reflects a broader trend in UK policymaking? Developed think tanks can outweigh the advice of permanent civil servants or experts, independent audits, etc.?
Well, certainly, I think in that setup, yes. Certainly in that setup. I think Rishi Sunak, he was really floundering. This project was really expensive. He thought he was going to lose the next election. And I suppose you could say, and it seemed like an easy solution. And it was, I think, presented to him as an easy solution. Interestingly, Andrew Gilligan had tried to stop Boris Johnson doing it. And Boris Johnson had said, no, we want this big project, we're going to do it. Whereas I think Rishi Sunak was an accountant. He looked at the spreadsheet, what it was actually going to cost. He obviously got the Treasury in to tell him that it was all terrible. And they did it, I think, without really telling very many, as I understand it, they didn't really tell very many people what they were going to do, so they could do it without a campaign being mounted to stop them doing it, because particularly Andy Street in Birmingham was really quite a powerful figure, although he was in Birmingham, and he wanted it to go further, because for him it absolutely made sense for Birmingham to be joined up to Manchester, and the Midlands to be joined up with the North, and it was all about investment.
Yeah, well, the point you make, and the point that was made by the Major Projects Association in a report they did about a year ago, was that 1,200 hours of parliamentary time to come up with this project, and half an hour in a conference room to cancel it. It's kind of not particularly. Yeah, you describe the cancellation or scaling back of HS2 as the death of HS2 as a serious railway line, undermining connectivity in the north, creating long-term financial and logistical consequences, particularly in areas like Crewe. Yeah. There's a whole chapter on the impact of Crewe, which invested a lot on the basis of this train line arriving, and of course it never happened. The big question then, it also cost, you reckon, 2.2 billion to cancel it. The big question, Sally, is, was cancelling the northern phase of the project the right or the wrong thing to do in hindsight? No,
it was completely the wrong thing to do. The whole point of the project was about the line. Basically, a lot of the point of the project was about the line from Birmingham to Manchester, and even Birmingham to Yorkshire, and joining up that area of the country which is so badly served. That was the point. That was to some extent the point of the project. Or I would say more or less the whole point of the project. And almost for political reasons, it sort of started in London. But what's happened now is you've got this fast train line to Birmingham, and it doesn't make sense as a project. Why would you just have a fast train line to Birmingham if it doesn't go any further? So my view is actually you need to build some sort of modular train. Let's get some different technology, but build some simple fast train line, but you still need to sort out crew. You're still going to have to sort out that junction. It's a complete nightmare.
And ultimately, you go back to the Oakervee review, which of course pointed out that the big benefits of HS2 are in the second phase.
And so you have to sort out crew. You have to sort out some fast link between Liverpool and Manchester, and actually some of the line as it was going to be builds at least a good chunk of that anyway. And you need to sort out that line. You need to sort out that line from Birmingham. You need to sort out crew as a junction anyway, which Network Rail failed to do when they were upgrading the West Coast Main Line. And you need to build some kind of fast and decent connection to for freight and for passengers all up the West Coast Main Line.
Sally, you have become a railway geek. I know, I can see that.
I know,
you're drawing pictures. You're drawing pictures in the sky of railway lines. It's great. I've become
a railway bore. I realise I see my friends' eyes glazing over when I start talking like this. I'm pleased I can talk like this to you, Anthony. But I sometimes at a dinner party, I don't really go to dinner parties, but maybe in a pub, I can see. And I start chatting like this, and I can see their eyes glazing. Go, oh my god!
Here she goes again. Yeah, no. Anyway, a few lessons. 22 lessons that you've listed them out there. Really interesting stuff. One of the ones which made me smile was you say, "Don't rush a complex infrastructure project." What engineers dreamt up was more complex than any other high-speed rail project in the world. That's not to say I'm blaming engineers. Put them alone in a room and tell them to design a world-beating railway, and they will do it. Few would suggest, Sally, that HS2 has been delivered fast. What do you mean?
No, but you've got to plan. But it is what the Stewart review says as well.
Yeah.
You have to plan it. By the time they've been going at this for sort of more than 11 years by the time Alan Cook turns up, and they still don't know that they're still working out that they don't know exactly what bit of ground they're building this, and they're finding things like electricity pylons in the way, which take a lot of time to get to, which take time. It's not easy to move an electricity pylon. So they don't actually know the exact place they're sort of putting the track. By 2020, partly because it's taken a long time to buy the land and everything and get hold of the land. But and then he gives. They don't get the go ahead, and then and. They're saying now that Mark Wilder is saying now that they shouldn't have started without actually knowing where it was going to go. But if you hadn't got that go ahead in 2020 to actually start doing it, the whole thing would never have happened.
No.
So and that I'm sure many would say that might not have been a bad idea, unless you'd had that go ahead, it would have gone because of COVID, because of all the people in number 10 who didn't want it to happen, and because because nobody thought there was any real future in rail travel in 2020.
Well, another lesson you say is go modular. Forget iconic stations and bespoke bridges. Is there no longer a place for inspirational design then, Sally?
No, not when you've got state. No.
Okay.
I feel
all right.
strongly about this. No, we're the state. So look, we built those iconic stations in the past because these were railway magnates, and so they wanted to have these extraordinary stations as a sort of advert for their fantastic train lines that they were building. These fantastic new trains that they were building. This is the state building a railway. Yep. Let's build really decent modular stations, and let's build a really decent high-speed rail network that works. But let's not gold plate. Let's make it as simple as possible, and let us learn from what people have done around the world. So it's Lego. Build it out like Lego. All the problems you've got, they've been solved elsewhere.
Good stuff. Well, lots to be talking about. Just finally then, you quote the Parliament's Public Accounts Committee report in 2025. It said, High Speed 2 programme has become a casebook example of how not to run a major project. It's unacceptable that over a decade into the programme, we still do not know what it will cost, what the final scope will be, when it will finally be completed, or what the benefits it will deliver. Of course, it came 18 months after the northern section was scrapped. You say as one of your lessons that lessons learned are important. Do you think we really will learn lessons when it comes to building the next project?
I do hope so. Because we didn't do they built HS1, and there were some lessons learned from HS1 building that tunnel, and some really good things HS1 did, including not being that antagonistic, getting on with the leader of Kent Council, and building it out as Tisha V. Noor. So we never learned those lessons, and we never learned the lessons, things that went wrong or were difficult in that project either. and then we've embarked on HS2, and I worry that we won't learn the lessons, or we'll learn the wrong ones. So, the ones we're starting to learn, the things we're talking about now are planning, loosening the planning laws, and maybe getting rid of some of the environmental protections, and bat tunnel is mentioned a lot in this. But those are lessons to be learned, but there's so much more, and I think the government has to look at itself and and the actual British state has to think about what it's doing and what it did wrong in this, and take some responsibility, rather than saying it's all about planning laws and it's all about local government and it's all holding us all up. And that is it. They do need to go to the psychotherapist and really understand the culture. What happened in the culture, and take some responsibility and a bit of self-reflection about what they did.
Well, finally, you also say, like many others, I was agnostic about HS2 when I started researching. It seemed expensive, and I didn't really understand why it was being built, nor why it costs so much. So, Sally, the final question, are you still agnostic about HS2?
I think it's a really good idea. I think the economy does have to rebalance between the north and the south. I do think that infrastructure projects are an important element in doing that. So I absolutely do believe in that. I do think that we are going to have to replace the Victorian railway lines. We can't keep going with them. So we are going to have to build new railways. But as I've said, I think...
I thought there might be a but coming.
But HS2, as it was conceived, ultimately... was as it was conceived, as it was told to the country, ultimately was a failure. But we do need to build a new line between Birmingham and Manchester, and a proper junction, and build maybe another bit so that we get faster to Edinburgh.
Well, we shall see what happens. Apparently, the land is still available.
Land is still available.
The drawings and the plans are still very much there. So let's see what happens. Sally, thank you so much for chatting to me today. Off the Rails is a really interesting book. It's a great read, and I know that no matter how much or how little you know about the project, it will be an eye-opener. So thanks very much for sharing your thoughts today and expanding on the book's ideas.
No, it's been lovely to chat to you. Thank you very much.
Good stuff. No, I really enjoy that. But sadly, that's all we've got time for on the podcast now. But there is more in the pipeline as we continue to probe the big issues facing the sector. And if you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you'll find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So thanks for joining us. Thanks so much to Sally for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.